Welcome to Empower and Evolve, and I'm your host, Dunstan, and thanks for coming into today's episode. Now, this podcast is designed for those looking to break free from stagnation and enhance their well-being through actionable insights and inspiring stories. So you'd never miss an episode, hit that follow button and follow us through our social media accounts. Now, if you find value in our discussions, consider sharing this podcast with friends who you think might benefit listening today. Now let's get started on this journey of empowerment and transformation. Hi, Dan here, and thanks for coming back to Empower and Evolve. Now for today, we'll be talking about a very important discussion that I feel many of us encountered at different stages in our lives. And you know what that is? It's knowing when it's time to move on. Now, you might be thinking it's about relationships, right? But mind you, it's not limited to just that. It also covers your job, your personal goal, even us recognizing that when it learn to let go, it can be both liberating and daunting, and for most can be scary. That's why they would try to avoid moving on. So we'll talk more about that today, understanding, what are the signs that it's time to move on, and then at the latter part of today's episode, we'll talk about 7 steps that I think are 7 actionable things that you can do as you start to move on, right? Once you've recognized that. And I hope that today's episode will not limit you to just thinking about it in a relationship sense, but you could also apply that, just like I mentioned earlier, in a professional sense, right? So without further ado, let's dive in, right? So just like I mentioned, there are 4 key indicators when it's time to move on, right? The first one, and I think it's the more obvious one, right? There are emotional indicators. It's the emotional indicators wherein you persistently feel unhappy in your situation. You feel frustrated, you feel anxious, whether it's a situation, whether it's in the office, whether it's in a relationship, right? And when emotions are always getting, juggled up, so to speak, right? You're always having spikes of feeling unhappy, feeling scared, feeling upset, feeling angry all the time with the situation or with the other person that you are with. I mean, that's a very, very strong emotional indicator. Second is when you talk about stagnation versus growth, right? Now, this may apply more on a professional sense, right? Because, of course, as employees, you want to be able to grow in the company or the organization you're working with, right? But if you feel you've been sitting in the same chair for maybe 5, 6 years, 7 years, and you start to slowly feel unhappy, right? You feel that there's no more movement for you. Maybe it's also a sign, right? Sometimes we can also use that stagnation versus growth in relationships. Now, I would always say, and maybe this is just a love advice, right? Maybe you could pick a line or two from this. I always believe. Here it goes. Sorry, no. So I always believe that a healthy relationship is a relationship where the two people can grow together and apart at the same time. So it might be weird when you think about it. How can someone be growing together and at the same time apart? Remember, you two are 2 different individuals. You two have different personalities, values, and the skills. So on a professional sense and maybe in a personal sense, you have to also be developing, right? And there are things that you can grow as with your partner in the same path, right? Whether you two doing the same hobby, right? Or taking on, let's say you two like to do travel or take trips, right? And if you stop doing that, then maybe there's a form of stagnation there, right? It's only, let's say, your partner's having the opportunity to travel, maybe because it's work related, they're not able to join. Then maybe that's a form of stagnation because you're not going to be growing together. And the other person is growing professionally because she is, or he or she is getting exposed, right? That's just one example. And there are other examples wherein you two can be growing together or not be growing together and getting stagnated. Your growth getting stunned, right? The third one is an impact on well-being. Because remember when we talk about relationships, and earlier I mentioned the emotional indicators. If you feel that you lose yourself in that situation, you lose yourself in that moment, or in that, not really the moment, in that relationship, or whether it's personal, whether it's professional, where your values, your beliefs, your personal values and personal beliefs are changed because you were trying to align yourself with the other person without the other person respecting your personal values and your personal beliefs. I mean, that's a red flag, right? You lose your personality. At the end of it, you know, sad to say, you might end up not knowing who you are anymore. And the same thing goes with work. You know, I'll take a snip of an anime, and I know it's a Netflix movie also as well, called 100 Things to Do Before I Turn to a Zombie, or something to that note. I mean, please tell me, you know, feel free to comment in the YouTube or in the Spotify, the right title, right? But I remember the lead character there. He had a goal. He wanted to work in a corporate office. The corporate office was his dream job. But then he met a really toxic boss who was, for the lack of a better term, you know, was gaslighting him every single time. He was bullying him to the point that he was already a robot going to the office. He didn't have a purpose anymore. And because he was in that very dangerous cycle, you know, looking at it from an outside, as from an outsider, right? From my perspective as a watcher, I saw toxicity in the workplace, right? And at the latter part of it, you know, it's funny that, you know, there was that zombie apocalypse thing that happened in that anime. It gave him an opportunity to find himself again, right? Now, the last indicator would be your loss of passion and interest. Now, when you lose your enthusiasm for something that you love, whether it's a job, it's a hobby, or it's a relationship, it really hurts, right? Because you don't go into a relationship just because. You put in the time, you put in the effort, you put in the energy, right? And same thing with in the professional space. When you feel sad with the company that you're working with, you know, you can just imagine the time you spent to redo your resumes, go through the interview process, go complete all of your pre-employment requirements, right? And then you have to say goodbye to that company and try to move on. I mean, it's just resetting yourself, right? And it's really difficult from a personal standpoint because you have to spend time and effort and sometimes money, right, to be able to do that, to move on. But it is what it is, right? You could just be staying in that relationship. You could just be staying in that work, and then you lose your identity. You don't find happiness. You don't have the passion anymore with what you're doing. You're losing interest, right? And the only thing that motivates you maybe it's because of money. Maybe it's because there are expectations that was given to you by the people around you, that you have to be successful in terms of your job, right? Your career, your money, your income, or you have a title, right? Like a senior manager, a director, perhaps, right? And if you're not happy anymore, but because people around you are looking up to you, you have to suck it up and try to live that. And I will tell you, it will eat you from inside, from the inside, going out slowly, day by day by day. And even how hard you try to hide that in front of the people around you, it's gonna come out one way or another. You will encounter someone who's really hypersensitive or hyper observant who'll pick up on that. May not be able to talk to you directly because of the differences in levels, perhaps, or if that person's brave enough, perhaps, would even try to start that conversation. And then you'd stop to realize, yeah, you're right. Maybe I'm just lying to myself, right? But so much for trying to feeling bad about you being in that situation wherein part of you says you want to move on, part of you says you have to keep it, right? For the second half of this episode, let's take into consideration that after you saw the signs, you thought about it, you reflected on it, and you personally feel that, yeah, maybe it's really time to move on. So, I have 7 actionable items that I think you can use for you to be able to discern, for you to be able to take a step back and look at it from a bird's eye view, look at it in a objective way, objectively looking at that situation, right? And I'll start off by thinking about your values, right? When you think about your personal values, what truly matters to you? And think about, is your current situation aligned towards that personal value, your core values, towards your goals? Sometimes, a roadblock or a hurdle in front of you actually opens an opportunity for another pathway for you that surprisingly will be part of your new journey that you'll grow as a person. And like just like how I started this podcast. I mean, people were telling me to, hey Dan, start your podcast. It's been months that we've been telling you to start it off. And I really put it off for quite some time. I mean, I even let the pandemic pass through, didn't join the bandwagon wherein at that time I could have just jumped in the bandwagon of, podcasters and started the podcast already. But I was holding off, right? Because at that time, yes, I wanted to do that. But the current situation at the time does not allow me to do so. Right? So next on your list is creating a pro and cons list. For some you call it a plus and a minus. So how do you do that? Get a sheet of paper, fold it lengthwise in the middle. One side, put a cross on it like pros. On the other side, a minus or cons. Now start writing down and making a list of all the positives and the negatives. Reasons why you should be staying versus you moving on. Spend maybe an hour on that. Just sit down, think about it, write it down. Every single thing that you can think of. It may be a lame reason for some, but just because you thought about it, write it down. And then sleep on it, then go back and look at that list. You will be surprised to think and see that even the smallest reasons does actually hold value. Right? Now you've gone to that list. I'll give you the third actionable thing that you can do. You seek support. You ask for help from trusted friends or maybe mentors for guidance in your perspective. Discussing with them how you're feeling right now because of the situation, and maybe they can help you process that feeling and that situation into a more sensible direction in terms of you deciding to stay or you deciding to move on, right? Now, once you've set your mind to move on, I mean, if you've been listening to the podcast for the past year, we talked about change. We talked about uh, a little bit. We had a similar topic about moving on, and you always have to start off by identifying small goals that you can do as you start changing your old routine. By building a new routine, identifying new small goals that leads you toward that new goal, that new path that you want to move to, right? And that may be as simple as updating your resume, setting a sending that application, maybe trying a new hobby, right? As long as you try to do one thing at a time and change and moving on, I will tell you, maybe I'm not yet done, but I will tell you that the timeline for you to move on really varies from person to person. Some people can move on in a snap of a finger. Some may take years, and that is perfectly fine, right? Moving on to my fifth one, and tying that up, is you have to learn to practice self-compassion, right? That it is okay that you're still in the process of moving on. Yes, you want to maybe move fast, but sometimes things happen in God's time, right? Um, because even if how hard you try to move on, you want to move on, but the situation isn't right. Pretty much the perfect storm isn't there yet for you to be really moving on. You just have to weather it out. You just have to forgive yourself that, hey, it's not the right time yet. Hey, just be patient. But it doesn't mean you stop looking at those small goals. You have to continuously do the work to move on, right? And as you try to move towards your small goals, you have to now do visualization. Make your future board, your visual board of how you want your life to be like. Some people may start off with changing their hair color, getting their hair done, nails done, right? I mean, for girls, some people would buy new things, some people would throw old things out, right? Some would go put a goal that I have to buy a new car, a new bag, or I mean, that's perfectly fine as long as it resonates to your core values, right? You're able to forgive yourself, and by achieving that future goal, it makes you feel a new person. And when I say a new person, it's not a person with a different set of core values and thinking, right? But it's more of a person who has already embraced the situation in the past where they were before, and they're not afraid to carry that with them as they move forward. Now, not as an emotional baggage, but more of a memory of the old life they had and how their life is right now, right? Now, once you visualize that, once you've done your planning, once you've done your pros and cons list, right? The last thing you need to do, of course, is take action, right? With the goals that you have, you identify the steps. You make a checklist, you make a timeline, maybe my moving on goal for the next 6 months. What are the things I need to do? What are the small goals I want to achieve? And start doing that. Get your cheerleaders in your back, pushing you forward to do the things that you want to do as you move on. Right? In one of my last few episodes, I mentioned this. The cheerleaders you have at the start of your journey may not be the same people that's going to be there at the end of the journey. But what is important is you continue your journey every single day towards the goal, because you will meet new cheerers. You will meet new fans, right? Along that journey. And you'll be surprised. Maybe some of the people that was with you at the start of your journey will be the same people that you will have at the end of your journey. Enjoy that journey. And remember that we here, me and the rest of the Empower and Evolve team, are always here to cheer you on as you try and start and taking action for you to move on. So remember, we're here for you. With that, thank you so much for listening to today's episode. We'll catch you next week. But for now, stay safe. Take care. Bye for now. Hey buddy, thank you for joining us on this transformative journey of empowerment and growth. Now remember, it's not just about evolving. It's about embracing that incredible power within you to become the best version of yourself. Keep striving for greatness, because together, we can create a world where empowerment knows no bounds. And if you find value in today's episode, please subscribe, rate, and share this podcast with someone who could use that little inspiration. Until next time, stay empowered, stay inspired, and keep shining brightly on your path to evolution. With Empower and Evolve, you have the tools to unleash your potential and rewrite your story. Let's continue to evolve together.